Hello, you're watching the Technology Magazine show, brought to you by Technology Magazine, AI Magazine, Cyber Magazine, Mobile Magazine, Data Center Magazine, and BizClik. My name's Neil Perry, and I'm here to bring you all the latest news, analysis, and opinions from the world of technology every 4 weeks. Joining me today is the editor of Mobile and Data Center Magazines, Josephine Wallbank. Hello, Jose. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing, Neil?
I'm very well, thank you. If we were doing the show tomorrow, we would actually be doing this show in the same room at the same time, which would, I think, be a first.
I think it'd be the first ever.
I think it would be. That would be breaking new ground. But not today, because we've got a big meeting tomorrow. We're all together in the same room where we have to actually remind each other what we look like rather than through screens. Anyway, great to have you with us, Jose. Let's start by taking a moment, of course, to remind everyone of the, you can say hello in the comments section. And of course, here on LinkedIn, and we should remind them to make sure they go and vote in the LinkedIn poll too. Always very important during the show. Jose, up to you. What's the poll today?
Fantastic. So, as you know, hardly a surprise, but we will be talking about ChatGPT quite a lot in this episode. And as the new solution takes the world by storm, some early adopters are experimenting with the tool to perform tasks at work. This spans all sorts of potential uses. We were talking about backstage, writing emails, scripts, summarizing reports. And according to some surveys, one conducted by Fishbowl in particular, around 30% of 4,500 professionals had already used ChatGPT in their work.
That seems almost low to me. That almost seems low. It seems everyone is. I don't seem to go by a day without getting a message from someone saying, "Look what this can do." It seems low to me.
I suppose from a kind of content perspective, we're all very excited about it. We're all kind of experimenting with it, but considering how early stages the application's in, I think, a third to me I was quite surprised it was that high. I thought it might still be a little bit new to everyone, but so there's, according to in the World Economic Forum in Davos last month, the IBM chairman and CEO Arvind Krishna predicted that large language models like ChatGPT will become a normal part of business operations. And some of these reports are certainly seeming to support that trend. So with this in mind, we're curious to know whether you've used ChatGPT to assist you in your day-to-day tasks at work. So have you used ChatGPT as part of your working day? And if so, how regularly?
Yeah, not the most difficult of questions, but that'll be an interesting one. And anyway, we'll see what all our viewers say on that later on. But first, we have a guest to welcome to our stage. I'd like to invite Tom Raftery to our digital stage. Joseph.
So Tom is a renowned influencer and thought leader focusing on sustainability, supply chain and technology. And he's consistently ranked in the top 10 global leaderboards for thought leadership. That is a mouthful. Top 10 global leaderboards for thought leadership in sustainability, climate, supply chain, IoT and the energy transition. And he's also the host of the two immensely popular podcasts, Climate Confident and Digital Supply Chain. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Tom in.
Thank you so much, guys, for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be with us.
Obvious place to start, Jose. Do you want to kick off the questions? Because we've got a lot to get through.
I mean, got to start with me to go on. So based on this week's poll question, what would you vote for? Have you used ChatGPT for work?
I have. And I would be going for use it every day. It's fascinating. Although I have to say it's getting worse with every new version. The very first version that came out was phenomenal. I showed it to my 16-year-old the day it came out, and he couldn't quite get what I was saying when I was telling him about it. So I said, okay, what did you study in maths today? And I forget what he said, some kind of functions. So I said, okay, and I typed into ChatGPT, explain these functions in the voice of Hagrid to Harry Potter. Boom. And out came this phenomenal explanation of the functions in absolutely the voice of Hagrid to Harry Potter. And my kid's head exploded. But I started experimenting with it then for use with the podcasts. And initially it was quite easy. it wouldn't take a full transcription of the podcast. So what I would do is I would break the podcast up into 10-minute segments, the transcription up into 10-minute segments, feed it to ChatGPT, and then start asking ChatGPT questions about it. And that worked for a while. But then when the January 9th version came out, it could no longer take 10-minute transcriptions, and I had to break it into 5-minute transcriptions. And then when the most recent version came out, it couldn't even remember, I could feed it 5-minute transcriptions, but it would start forgetting, once I'd fed it 2 or 3, it would start forgetting the first 1 or 2. So it couldn't keep its memory going. It couldn't keep the state. So what I had to do then was feed it transcriptions in 5 minutes and then say, summarize this transcription for me. Then I would take the summary and put it into a Word document, give it the next 5 minutes, do the same thing until I had a Word document with a full summary of the full transcription, and then copy the full summary back into ChatGPT, and then I could question it about the podcast. So it starts to get a lot more cumbersome, but I'm fascinated to see what's coming, because we had the announcement last night from Google that they're releasing Bard, as they call it. Where they got that name, I don't know, but they're releasing Bard at an event that they're hosting tomorrow. And I want to say within an hour of that announcement from Google, Microsoft came out and said that they're going to have an announcement about their launch of new Bing with built-in ChatGPT or GPT today. So they wanted to get in ahead of Google. So I think the AI wars have begun. So it's going to be fun to see what happens. Now, I mean, the others, Alibaba have also got one which is called Bert or Ernie or something like that. It's going to be great. The next few months are going to be really interesting to watch the AI space.
It's fascinating because you just know they're all going to push each other. The fact that what's there already is incredible. As you say, it blows your mind the first time you start looking at it. It's one of those moments where it's a kind of technology that you didn't knew existed before, and all of a sudden it's there.
Yeah.
And it just opens up a new dimension. For you, from your experience of it and looking at that, do you think it's really they're going to push each other to actually reach new heights?
Oh, completely. It is absolutely game changing. I mean, even some of Microsoft's announcements about what they're going to do. I mean, they have this new add-on for Teams. So Teams, for people who might not be aware, is Microsoft's version of Zoom, but it fits in quite nicely with Office. And what they're doing there is they're putting a ChatGPT version into Teams so that when you go on a call with teammates, it starts taking notes. It does a transcription of the call, and then because it has a transcription, it can do things like it can look through the contents of the call. It can make highlights from the call. It can make a to-do list for the call. It can make action items and assign them to people based on the conversation in the transcription. So if this was that Teams call and you had asked me, Josie, that after this and before the next call, I had to do this, and this, that would be noted. I would get an email with, the to-do list of things that had been assigned to me to do. So, even just that, and that's a very simplistic use of this kind of technology. But when you start to assign things like that to Excel, just go several steps beyond that and think of one of Microsoft's really successful products, which is Visual Studio for programming. And suddenly, when you start putting that kind of intelligence into Visual Studio, I mean, you already have the likes of Copilot in there to help programmers, but this is going orders of magnitude beyond that again. So the productivity levels that this will unlock across the board are going to be immense.
I've got one more question, because I pride myself on being immature sometimes, and that is, have you got it to translate or present any of your podcasts in the style of Hagrid? Because I paid to hear that.
No, I haven't. If only because it doesn't have a voice. But that would be interesting. Yeah, that'd be fun to do.
It would be. It's how we use technology, isn't it? You're often the most incredible bit of technology. We get it to talk like a pirate or something. Anyway, but let's
cat pictures.
Exactly. That's what we did with YouTube when it first turned up. We need to get onto the podcasts now. For anyone who hasn't partaken in the content you'll produce, talk us through it. What's for you? What's the main inspiration behind them and the impact they've been having?
So, I'm ex-SAP. I joined SAP in 2016 as a VP evangelist, and my areas, what I was doing a lot of at the time was kind of working as a futurist and giving talks about the future of digital, the future of energy. I'm a bit ADD, so I like to look at things where there's disruption happening and new stuff going on all the time, because I get bored if things stay static. And so areas that are being heavily disrupted are like the likes of the energy space, the automotive space. There's a lot of disruption happening there. Sustainability is a big one as well, and something I've been involved with for a long time. And through kind of an accident of reorganization within SAP, I found myself in the supply chain organization knowing very little about supply chain. So I was going around giving lots of keynotes about, the future of digital and all this kind of stuff. And I wasn't contributing a whole lot to the team that I was actually on. And I thought, this isn't very sustainable from a job security perspective. So I thought, how can I help? So I approached my manager, Richard Howells, and I said, Richard, what if I started a podcast around supply chain? Because that way I could invite guests on who know about supply chain, and that way I could be contributing to the team and at the same time teaching myself about supply chain, because I wasn't an expert about supply chain. I knew very little about it at the time. And so that was the middle of 2019. I started the podcast then. I called it the Digital Supply Chain Podcast, because it was about the digitization of supply chain and future trends, where things are going. So I started that. And then, of course, lockdown came in the end of February 2020. And I had been doing one episode every 2 weeks. So I had to quickly pivot because I couldn't go traveling and doing keynotes anymore. So instead I switched to doing 2 episodes of that podcast per week. I kind of bookended the week with an episode on Monday and an episode on Friday. And I have guests on all the time, and we're talking about what's interesting and what's happening and where the future of supply chain is. So it's kind of a fascinating one, because supply chain is something that, a lot of people weren't really aware of until COVID happened, and suddenly everyone was talking about where did all the toilet rolls go, and all these kind of
everyone became an expert, didn't they? Everyone became an expert overnight.
So I had some fascinating conversations, and it continues on. I keep going. So I left SAP in September, and I took the 2 podcasts with me. I didn't talk about the second podcast just yet. So the second podcast, SAP started in late 2019, early 2020. It was announced at Davos that SAP were starting a climate initiative, which they called Climate 21. So I stuck my hand up, because this was a kind of a hot button topic for me. And I said, I'll run a podcast on that. And they said, great. So it took me a while to get it organized. The first episode went live in December 2020. And I ran that with 1 episode a week, having really interesting people on talking about climate, but talking about it from a positive perspective. So the pitch I want for the podcast, or wanted and still continue with the podcast, is I wanted to highlight successful emission reduction stories and strategies, because I want people to be listening to it and get ideas on what they can do, the kind of takeaways they can get, and inspire them to take action themselves. So I've had on some fascinating guests. I've had on people like Bill McDonough, who wrote Cradle to Cradle, which was what kicked off the whole circular economy movement. I had Professor Sir David King on, who kind of led the climate negotiations for the UK government in Paris, and now leads the Centre for Climate Repair in Cambridge. I've had on people I've had the global chief sustainability officers for BCG, for Deloitte, for Capgemini, chief environmental officer for Microsoft. I recently had on Luis Amaral, who is the CEO of the Science Based Targets Initiative. I've had on Magali Anderson, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Holcim, who are the largest producer of cement and concrete products outside of Asia. So absolutely phenomenal guests with really great stories to tell. And I've been having a ball doing it as well, because you mightn't have noticed, but I like talking.
But the positivity there, do you find it's too easy for people to get caught up in the negative stories. This has gone wrong. This isn't working. This company's done this. This country isn't doing that. You could spend all day talking like that and become very, very sort of depressed about the situation very, very quickly. Why for you is it so important to celebrate the positivity and the successes?
For that very reason. I've been following climate and giving talks around climate back to 2005, 2006. Like I said, it's a very hot button topic for me. And if you follow that space as closely as I do, it's very hard sometimes to stay positive. So I thought, there are good things happening. They're just not getting highlighted. And one of the reasons they don't get highlighted is very often the media likes to focus on bad news. There's a saying in the media, if it bleeds, it leads. And so, the good news stories drop below the fold if they get featured at all. So I wanted to exclusively feature the good news stories. A, so people could, as I said earlier, learn from them, take ideas away and go and do similar things themselves. But B, kind of selfishly, it was an exercise in my own mental health as well, so that I'd be hearing good news stories every week and not falling into despair.
Does that also help with, I'm taking over, Joe, so I do apologise. But when it comes to, you've been going through some of the list of guests and speakers you've had on, knowing that you're going to be talking about some of those positive things and bringing out those things that maybe aren't always getting picked up by certain areas of the media, do you feel that has actually helped the podcast get established because people know they're getting a chance to celebrate some of the good things?
I do, and I should have mentioned as well, by the way, I forgot to mention it. I did say that I called the podcast initially Climate 21, but when I left SAP, it quickly became obvious to me that branding was hurting rather than helping the podcast, because it was kind of confusing because people didn't know what the 21 of Climate 21 was. Like I said, it was an internal project name in SAP where 21 referred to the 21st century. So I thought, okay, this isn't helping. Why don't I rebrand? So I rebranded podcast at the start of this year, and I've now called it the Climate Confident Podcast. And I've seen even just that simple act of rebranding it, I've seen the numbers start climbing even more again. So it's doing really well. I'm very happy with it. Recently I rolled out a way for people to support the podcast, which has been nice too. So if anyone who's a regular listener feels they're getting value from it, they can jump on the support page, and for €3 a month, less than the price of a cup of coffee, help me make better episodes.
Fantastic. And no, it's really cool content. Do you think, what, I suppose, unique value do you think the podcast genre brings to these kind of B2B discussions that in a way that blogs or kind of social media doesn't in the same way?
Yeah, it's a different medium, as you point out. I think one of the great things that I find from podcasts is they fill in what could otherwise be dead time. So, for example, what I often do is when I'm going for a walk in the mornings, I put on the headphones and I listen to podcasts. When I'm driving in the car, I'm listening to podcasts. I'm not listening to the talk radio. I have, my own select podcasts that I want to listen to. And so when I'm, in the garden, when I'm in the kitchen, I'll have the headphones on and I'll be listening to content that I otherwise wouldn't be able to get. And there are podcasts about everything. No matter what niche thing it is that you're fascinated about, you can find a podcast about it, at least one, if not several. So that for me, I mean, for a blog, blogs are great. I blog myself all the time. But you have to be sitting in front of a screen reading it. You can't do that while you're driving your car for obvious reasons, or you physically you can, but you obviously shouldn't. Highly illegal and very dangerous. But you can be listening to podcasts. So it's another way of consuming information in times when you couldn't be doing it otherwise.
Do you think it makes these topics more accessible, I suppose, to people that might not necessarily be in the industry or be new to the industry?
Yeah, I think it does, because there's a couple of things about podcasts that differentiate them from the likes of blogs, apart just from the fact that you can do it while you're in your car or walking your dog or whatever it is. The other thing that you get from podcasts is it's a richer medium. So you can't hear someone's tone of voice in text. And that causes lots of problems when people are sending emails to each other and so on. I'm sure we've all had issues where in a tweet conversation or an email thread or something, someone takes something up the wrong way because you can't hear the tone of voice. You get that richness in podcasts that you don't get in blogs. You get it in video as well. Absolutely, video is another great way of doing it. But the disadvantage video has in this context is, as I referred to with the blogs earlier, you need to be concentrating, you need to be looking at the screen to watch videos. Podcasts fit nicely in the middle. You've got the richness of the audio, the greater context, but you don't need the same amount of visual attention that you do with a video, for example. So they're great for that. And the other great aspect of them is, as I said earlier, there's podcasts about everything, no matter what it is. There's phenomenal comedy podcasts, if that's your thing. The BBC runs a great one, for example, or at least one. The Guardian runs some fantastic ones as well on science. There are amazing ones on all aspects of business. No matter what your niche, I'm sure if you're into darning socks, there's probably a darning socks podcast too.
I'm searching that later. I absolutely am. But Tom, let's just connect some of this back to the world of technology. For you, in what areas of sustainability is the tech industry lacking? Where are the gaps for you?
Right now, I would say the biggest gaps in, well, when I let me take a step back for a second and talk about sustainability. When I think of sustainability, it's a huge topic, and I tend to focus in on the climate aspects of sustainability, simply because, and this is going to sound horrible to say, but if we don't solve the issues around equal pay for women and men in the next 200 years, it'll be tragic, but it won't be an existential threat. If we don't solve the climate issue in the next 20, 30 years, it will be an existential threat. So that's where my focus on sustainability goes. It goes on climate. And within the climate space, there's a whole lot of stuff that we need to do. Technology can play a huge part in many aspects of it. The biggest issue I see right now, though, and it's not a tech issue, really, it's a standards issue, is that we haven't yet properly figured out how to report Scope 3 emissions. And that's something that is being worked on. There are standards bodies working on it. And as soon as it's ready, the technology will just, write it up the same way they do with all other standards. And it'll become similar to financial accounting standards. But that's a big gap right now. And, there will be a race to code them once they are finally agreed. And even the likes of organizations like the SEC in America, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they said last year that from next year, 2024, all large publicly traded companies are going to have to report their emissions out to Scope 3, and that those reports will have to be audited. And from 2025 on, all publicly traded companies, not just the large ones, will have to report their emissions and out to Scope 3, and they'll have to be audited. Now, there's been a pushback on that, so that might change slightly between then and when these regs come into effect. But it speaks to a direction of travel. All companies will, in time, be required to report out to Scope 3, and there's going to be massive amounts of technology required to enable companies to do that, not just the capturing of the information, but the reporting of it as well. Okay, well, Tom, time is against us. We could talk to you for hours because it's been fascinating. But one thing I will say is if you are on ChatGPT later on today and you see in the bit where it suggests other things that are talking about, if there is a request to write a podcast about darning socks, I will know exactly who wrote that. Tom, an absolute pleasure. Still to come after the break, we'll be sharing the results of this episode's poll and sharing some of the latest magazines to hit our virtual shelves. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Thanks, folks.
A trusting relationship is really important. That doesn't come at the start. Been going for 20 years at Nashtec. We provide technical solutions, whether that's supported by people, process and technology. We have a flexible model. We sell teams that can augment a client's capability to help a client move forward with what they want to do.
We started talking with Nige and Orlando at Pinson's about 3 years ago. worked really effectively at bringing some of Nigel and Orlando's vision to light, developing new products at speed, enabling the Pinsent Mason firm and business to recognise some of the successes they're seeing from their digital transformation journey.
We'd actually like to have a U-turn on the technology that we use in the development language that we're actually going into this project with. And all of our developers were skilled in that particular language. Really was collaborative, and actually what we've got now is a fast-paced delivery mechanism where we get great feedback quickly from the clients. Now we've proven the process and the cycle of taking a product from an idea to actually delivery. We believe that Pinsent Masons want to scale this. They've got a huge backlog of work that they want to do the same with, and they want to work with us on that because they trust us and they know we can deliver that.
My name is Nigel Tranter. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Pinsent Masons. We have a company called Nashtake who partners with us to provide development services. They're based out in Vietnam. We worked with Nashtake for a number of years, really on it in terms of development, delivery services, and really understanding what we need.
The future is looking really exciting. We're expanding the team, so we're bringing another small team, and that enables us to do some of the really exciting future-facing work where we're breaking new ground with Pinsent.
Hello, welcome back. And Jose, I don't know about you, I could have spoken to Tom all day. An absolute star. Can we have him back again? Absolutely. Right, let's crack into our newest magazine releases. And I'll start, if I may, with February's edition of Technology Magazine. So much stuff to get stuck into here. I'll just cover off a couple of my highlights. In this month's issue, we feature insights from SAP regarding exactly how enterprises can handle real-world problems through AI and the cloud. That is a fabulous read. We've also explored the importance of human capital in addressing the current digital skills gap and how anything as a service models can help to save the planet as well. They are both worth reading. Jose, your one, Data Center Magazine, what's in there?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a really fun issue for me to write. Firstly, because we, for our February edition, were able to gain insights from two of the industry's leading sustainability players, Layer 9 and Green Mountain, and get insights into the work that they're doing, the sustainable initiatives that they're driving, and generally their plans for the future as well. So that made a really interesting piece. A couple of pieces, sorry. And then alongside these exclusive interviews, we also explored the future of data center marketing. And in a link that was purely unintentional, but is quite pleasing, I spoke to Andy Davis, who's the host of the Inside Data Center podcast. And as Tom says, there really is a podcast for every niche. This one is absolutely dedicated to the data center industry and its developments and the kind of key players within it who span all different kind of skill sets and levels of expertise. So it's really interesting to hear, insights from apprentices up to, high-level CEOs. It's really cool. So we spoke to him about the rise of dedicated data center podcasts and the value that they're bringing to the industry, specifically from the angle of the current talent shortage and how this medium is helping the data industry to lose that kind of formidable reputation and the kind of the villain-esque kind of aura that's surrounded it for the last few years. So it's really interesting to speak to him.
I know that the talent shortage question, that's just something that won't go away. It's always near the top of the conversation in any networking area. What sort of things did he have to say about that?
It was really interesting. He said, I think the kind of, it's a very cliche overused term, but kind of humanizing of the industry and kind of, and coupled with a kind of a mentor-esque approach to having frank, very open discussions about the industry, about what it's doing, what it means, and the kind of different opportunities for roles within it, especially from people, as I mentioned, of different backgrounds, ages, genders, geographies. It was, he said, just kind of creating the platform for more open and honest discussions is really bringing younger, newer people in, which I thought was really interesting.
Jose, I'm going to be honest, I haven't read that bit yet. I do apologise, but I am going to read it now because that does sound fascinating. One more cover to take a look at, and one more issue to take a look at. Obviously, if you haven't had a chance to have a look at any of these, just go into the comments section, which is over there on my screen. I assume it's on that side on your screen as well. Links to all of them there, so you can take a look if you've not had a chance yet. Last one for us to look at, and I absolutely love this one. Cover of AI magazine. Jose, tell us how this one was put together. It's fantastic.
It's very cool, isn't it? So I can't say this was anything to do with me. This was our AI editor, George Hopkin. Him and the AI design team were behind this one. And yeah, it's a fantastic image. It's beautiful, really complex image. And it was all designed by OpenAI technology. So the George, I believe, was in discussions with ChatGPT, and then used that ideas in the DALL-E image generator to create a bespoke, unique image for the cover, which is, yeah, it's fascinating. It's really cool, especially when it's part of a kind of growing debate. It's been, for the last few months, it's been really increasing popular discourse, but about AI's place in art, especially, there's a recent winner of, I cannot remember the name for the life of me, but quite famous art competition recently had an AI winner, and it's kind of the complexities within that. It's a really, really fascinating topic, and the cover just adds to that, I think, in a really interesting way.
And it's got to be one of the first covers to be designed like that. So, yeah.
I'd like to think so.
I'd like to think. Someone tell us if it's otherwise in the comments. I'm sure you'll know. But that leads us very nicely to our poll results. It's almost as if we planned this show, isn't it? So how did it finish up today?
It was not what I was expecting at all. So the winner was option B, which was they have not used ChatGPT for work, but are interested in learning, which was 47% of the votes. And the next most popular was no, not yet. And only 24% of voters said that, yes, they regularly use it for work, which really surprised me. But then, as I mentioned earlier, as a tech writer, I think ChatGPT perfectly aligns with my own bias of what would be useful for work. So, but yeah, I think it was interesting to see that 29%, almost 30%, were not quite ready to express themselves as interested in learning more about it. So, what are your thoughts, Neil?
I don't know. I'm sure an awful lot of those people are still on the stage where they're in the novelty stage, where they're getting it to translate things into the style of Hagrid or like a pirate or something similar, because frankly, some of us are that immature when it comes to incredible new technology. Freely admit it. Okay. That is all the time we have for this episode. We do hope you've enjoyed it. Do make sure you tune in again next month. And if there's people you think would enjoy it, tell them as well. Make sure you share it. Thanks for interacting with us in the comments and watching live and taking part in the poll. It'd be a fairly wasted exercise if you didn't join in. So thank you very much for that. And do remember, this show is available to watch on demand. So please do share it with colleagues and anyone interested in technology. My thanks to Jose. Thank you so much for joining me today. Daisy as well, Ernie and the rest of our video production team behind the scenes who make it all happen. This has been a BizClik production, and we will see you next time.